Welcome to Occult Archives. You know, where we like to uncover all those mysterious myths and legends hiding behind some of history's most, well, let's say, feared books.
The books that some people would say are too dangerous to even read.
Exactly, but of course, we're not afraid to dive in.
And of course, neither are our listeners.
Right. We love to explore the forbidden, the hidden, the occult side of history.
And this deep dive, well, it's going to be quite a journey.
It really is. Because you've brought us Louis Jacolliot's Occult Science in India and Among the Ancients. This book first hit the scene back in 1875, and let me tell you, it's a fascinating read. It's like a window into how a 19th century European, a product of the Victorian era, viewed and interpreted ancient Indian occult practices.
It's definitely a product of its time, but that's also what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely. And today, we're focusing on this concept of the Pitris, those ancestral spirits. Jacolliot's book really delves into this doctrine. We're going to unpack what it meant, how it connected to other ancient esoteric traditions, and explore how this all fit into a bigger picture.
We're going to look at the system of initiation that Jacolliot describes, the powers that were attributed to initiates, and the philosophies that were at the heart of it all.
Get ready for a trip back in time, to a time when the spirit world was thought to be deeply interwoven with the lives of everyday people, and where the pursuit of occult knowledge, well, it was serious business.
It was a multi-generational endeavor. This wasn't just a weekend workshop. It was a lifetime commitment.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Now, right off the bat, it's important to understand that Jacolliot presents himself more as an observer. He's chronicling these beliefs and practices he encountered during his travels, not necessarily endorsing them. He's like, here's what I found, here's what they believed.
He's a reporter, a documentarian of esoteric, if you will.
Exactly. And one of the things he focuses on is this sect dedicated to the Pitris. It might be helpful to break down what that actually means.
Sure. So Pitris is a Sanskrit term. It essentially translates to spirits or ancestral shades. Think of them as the spirits of the ancestors playing an active role in the lives of the living.
Okay, so ancestor veneration is a big part of this. And the book really emphasizes the powerful role of the Brahmins in all of this. They weren't just priests, they were like the intellectual and spiritual elite of ancient India.
And it seems that a lot of their influence stemmed from their control of knowledge, especially occult sciences, through these very elaborate and quite intense initiation ceremonies.
So there was this structured system of initiation.
There was. Jacolliot lays out a three-tiered system specifically for the Brahmins. And it was no walk in the park. Each level required more study, stricter discipline, and often decades of dedication.
Decades. So this wasn't something you could just pick up over a long weekend.
Not at all. It suggests that spiritual authority was very closely tied to the level of esoteric knowledge you attained. It was almost like a way of controlling the flow of power within the religious hierarchy.
It's fascinating how knowledge itself was seen as a form of power, and Jacolliot breaks down what each of these degrees entailed, right? The first degree seems to be the most public-facing.
Yeah, it was all about those Brahmins who worked directly with the people. They were officiating at the pagodas, the temples, conducting ceremonies, performing sacrifices, that kind of thing.
So the rituals, the public face of religion.
Exactly. Their main texts of study were the first three Vedas, the foundational religious texts of Hinduism. They were the representatives of the faith to the everyday people.
Then the second degree gets a little more, well, spooky, for lack of a better term. We're starting to move into the realm of the unseen.
Right. These are the guys who acted as exorcists, soothsayers, the folks who people believed could call upon spirits.
They dealt with the things that went bump in the night.
In a way, yes. And their main text was the Atharva Veda, which is interesting because it's known for its collection of magical conjurations.
It was a shift from just performing religious duties to actively dealing with the spirit world, at least according to popular belief.
Or at least the perception of the spirit world. And their role, according to Jacolliot, was particularly important in times of hardship or crisis. They provided a sense of solace and control in the face of the unknown.
And then we get to the third degree. This is where it gets really interesting, because this level is described as being much more secluded, much more powerful.
Yes, these were the Brahmins who had very little interaction with the public. They were completely focused on studying the fundamental forces of the universe, both physical and supernatural. And it was believed that they could actually command gods and spirits.
They were like the master wizards, the archmages of their time.
Exactly. They had reached a level of understanding that supposedly allowed them to manipulate the very fabric of reality. Now, of course, whether that was actually true or just what people believed is another question.
Right, but belief is a powerful thing. This whole initiation process, it wasn't just about learning stuff. It was tied to this idea of a second birth, the Upanayana ceremony.
It was a spiritual transformation, a rebirth into a life dedicated to these higher pursuits. And the Pitris played a central role in this.
So it wasn't just an intellectual pursuit, it was a complete spiritual makeover.
In essence, yes. It was about aligning yourself with the lineage of your ancestors, with the spiritual forces that were believed to guide and protect you.
And one thing that really stands out in Jacolliot's book is the emphasis on secrecy. He talks about how core religious and occult knowledge was kept hidden from the general public, almost like a sacred trust.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just the Indians. He draws comparisons to other traditions like the Jewish Cabala, which also had secret doctrines revealed only to initiates.
So it's like this idea of an inner circle, the keepers of hidden knowledge.
Exactly. And it wasn't just for the sake of being exclusive. It was about protecting this knowledge, ensuring it wasn't misused or fell into the wrong hands.
It makes you wonder what exactly they were so afraid of. What knowledge could be so powerful that it needed to be guarded so closely?
Well, that's part of the mystery, isn't it? And speaking of hidden knowledge, Jacolliot introduces us to this text called the Agruchata Parikchai. He describes it as the philosophical heart of Hindu Spiritism.
And he compares its structure to early Kabbalistic texts, focusing on creation, the world, the human soul. But there's an added layer, right?
There is. The Agruchata Parikchai includes a fourth part specifically dedicated to the evocation of the Pitris.
Calling upon the spirits of the ancestors.
Yes, and the purpose of this was to gain access to everlasting truth, to learn from the wisdom of those who had passed on to the next realm. It's a fascinating concept.
It really is. So you have these levels of initiation, this connection to the ancestors, and then there's this even higher state, the yogai, that one could potentially achieve.
The yoga, yeah, it's like the pinnacle of spiritual achievement in this system. They were believed to possess extraordinary powers, a result of a lifetime of rigorous discipline, often including abstinence and intense meditation.
Jacolliot mentions that they used a 7-knotted bamboo stick as a kind of magic wand. It's such a vivid image.
It is. And it makes you think about the symbolism of objects in various magical and spiritual traditions around the world. Why a bamboo stick? Why 7 knots? What do they represent?
Those are great questions. It's like a little puzzle waiting to be solved. And then, of course, there are the more tangible aspects of this tradition, the exoteric manifestations and demonstrations that Jacolliot observed, especially those performed by the fakirs.
This is where we get into the realm of the seemingly supernatural, the stuff that makes you scratch your head and wonder if you're reading a fantasy novel or a historical account.
I mean, Jacolliot himself, even though he was skeptical, was baffled by some of the things he saw. He describes this fakir in Benares, Govindasamy, who was apparently capable of some incredible feats.
It really is a remarkable list. We're talking about objects moving without being touched, flowers appearing out of thin air, even levitation.
There was this thing with a punka, a traditional Indian fan, that supposedly started moving on its own. And Jacolliot tried to figure out how it was done, but he couldn't find any explanation.
He also mentions hearing knocks and sounds coming from a sealed room, disembodied hands producing flowers, and this really vivid description of a spectral Brahmin priest appearing with glowing letters on his chest.
It's like something straight out of a ghost story.
Yeah, and then there's this whole thing with a phantom musician playing a harmon flute that wasn't even supposed to be in the room, and feathers being thrown in the air and then just hovering there, controlled by some unseen force.
It really makes you wonder what was going on. Was it some kind of elaborate trickery? Was it mass hypnosis? Or was it something genuinely unexplainable?
Jacolliot himself doesn't offer any definitive answers. He's honest about his own confusion, but he's also careful not to jump to conclusions. He presents the facts as he saw them, leaving the interpretation up to the reader.
Which is exactly what a good observer should do. And it's what makes his account so compelling, because you're left with this sense of wonder and mystery. You can't help but try to come up with your own explanations.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so much fun, right? It's not just about accepting what we're told. It's about engaging with the mystery, pondering the possibilities.
Right. And it's not just about India either. Jacolliot goes on to draw connections between the doctrine of the Pitris and other ancient traditions from all over the world.
He sees parallels in the Zend-Avesta of Persia, the philosophy of Plato, the Alexandrian school, early Christianity. It's this really fascinating exploration of potential cross-cultural connections in esoteric thought.
And he really delves into the Jewish Cabala, pointing out all these structural similarities, like the degrees of initiation, the concept of sacred names of God, even cosmological parallels between the 10 Zephyroth in the Kabbalah and the 10 Prajapatis in Hinduism.
He also notes the shared belief in mediating spirits, both good and bad, and he even compares the Kabbalistic Trinity to the Hindu Trinity. It's like he's trying to piece together a global puzzle of ancient esoteric knowledge.
It makes you wonder if there was some kind of exchange of ideas going on back then, maybe through trade routes or migrations.
Or maybe these are just universal archetypes that emerged independently in different cultures. It's a question that anthropologists and historians are still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's one of those big, juicy questions that we may never have a definitive answer to. But it's fun to speculate. And Jacolliot even connects the magical practices of the Chaldeans to India, suggesting that some of this knowledge might have spread through emigration.
But he does make a distinction between what he calls vulgar magic and the higher, more philosophical aspects of the Pitris doctrine.
So he's saying that there's a difference between magic that's focused on worldly power or personal gain and magic that's part of a deeper spiritual system.
Exactly. He sees the Indian system at its core as being more about spiritual evolution and understanding the nature of reality.
So it wasn't just about spells and rituals, it was about a whole worldview. And speaking of worldviews, what about the underlying philosophy of the Book of the Pitris, as Jacolliot understood it? What were their core beliefs about the soul, the afterlife, the ultimate nature of reality?
They believed that the soul and the body were distinct entities, that the body was just a temporary vessel for the soul, and the soul was on a journey of transformation, striving for liberation from material attachments.
So kind of like the idea of reincarnation, but with a goal of ultimately transcending the cycle of birth and death.
Yes, the ultimate goal was to reunite with the great all, the divine source of all being. And Jacolliot introduces this concept of agasa, which is fascinating.
Agasa, it sounds almost like the force, but more mystical.
It's described as a pure, vital fluid, a medium through which all things, visible and invisible, are interconnected. It's the source of occult power, the energy that flows through everything.
It's like the cosmic glue that holds the universe together, and the Pitris, the ancestral spirits, they weren't just passive observers in all of this.
No, they were seen as guides, mentors, instructors for those who were still on the earthly plane. They were the wise elders, the keepers of ancient knowledge.
It's a beautiful concept, this idea that our ancestors are still watching over us, guiding us on our path. And Jacolliot paints this picture of the universe as this constantly evolving dynamic entity driven by a divine love symbolized by a trinity.
It's a very holistic, interconnected worldview, very much in line with many ancient spiritual traditions.
That's a lot to wrap your head around, but that's what we love about these deep dives, right? We get to explore these really big, mind-bending ideas that challenge our assumptions and make us think about the world in new ways.
Absolutely. And Jacolliot's work, even though it's over 150 years old, still has the power to do that. It reminds us that the mysteries of the universe are always there, waiting to be explored.
And that the human desire to understand these mysteries is timeless. So there you have it, folks, our deep dive into Jacolliot's occult science in India and among the ancients. We've explored the world of the Pitris, the system of initiation, the mind-boggling phenomena, and the profound philosophical underpinnings. What are your thoughts? What resonated with you? What questions are you left with?
We've just scratched the surface here, and there's so much more to discover. Take some time to ponder what we've discussed, do your own research, and see where it leads you.
The world of the occult is vast and often shrouded in mystery, but it's a world that's worth exploring if you're willing to keep an open mind and challenge your assumptions.
And who knows, you might just uncover some hidden truths about yourself and the universe along the way.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep those occult archives open.